Have you ever wondered how much debt the United States owes, how it affects your daily life, or what the government plans to do about it? Today, we'll take you on a journey to understand America's debt crisis in simple and relatable terms. By the end, you'll see how these massive financial figures play a role in your everyday life and what the future might hold for everyone. The national debt is the total amount of money the U.S. government owes to creditors. Think of it as the government's credit card balance, built up over time due to spending more than it earns. This debt comes in two forms. 1. Public debt, money borrowed from outside entities like individuals, businesses, and foreign countries. Intragovernmental debt, money the government borrows from its own programs, like Social Security trust funds. In simple terms, national debt represents the funds the government has borrowed to finance things like infrastructure, social programs, military expenses, and more. As of now, the U.S. national debt stands at an eye-watering figure of over $33 trillion. Indeed, it's growing every second. To put that in perspective, if you broke it down for each American citizen, that's over $98,000 per person. That includes everyone: men, women, children, and even newborns. But how did the U.S. accumulate so much debt? A combination of wars, economic emergencies, tax cuts, and long-term spending programs has contributed to this growing total. However, the numbers don't tell the full story without understanding how they impact all of us. To fund this debt, the government sells bonds and securities to investors. These investors can be individuals, corporations, or even foreign governments like China and Japan, two of the largest holders of U.S. debt. In return, the government promises to pay interest on the amount borrowed. This system works as long as lenders trust that the U.S. can pay its obligations. But what happens when borrowing becomes unsustainable? That's where the real-life consequences come in. You might be wondering, how does this debt affect me directly? Let's break it down into several key areas. First, national debt often contributes to inflation, which makes prices rise. When the government borrows heavily, it increases the money supply, reducing the dollar's purchasing power. If you've noticed that groceries, gas, or housing have become more expensive lately, the growing national debt plays a role in that. Debt also has an impact on interest rates. As the government borrows more, it competes with individuals and businesses for available credit. This pushes interest rates higher, making mortgages, car loans, student loans, and even credit card debt more expensive for everyone. For example, even a modest increase in interest rates could mean paying thousands more over the life of a mortgage. To pay off the interest on its debt, the government has limited options, one of which is collecting more revenue through taxes. This can lead to higher taxes on individuals and businesses. Higher taxes mean less money in the pockets of ordinary Americans, leading to reduced spending power and, in some cases, slower economic growth. When there's too much debt and not enough revenue, another option is to cut back on public spending. This can mean fewer dollars for schools, healthcare programs, infrastructure maintenance, and other vital services. Such measures can lead to declining quality in public services that many rely on every day. Lastly, today's debt doesn't just affect us, it impacts future generations. Children born today will grow up carrying the financial weight of decisions made long before they had a say in them. This long-term burden can limit economic opportunities and resources for them in the future. To put things into perspective, let's compare the U.S. to other nations. Countries like Japan have an even higher debt-to-GDP ratio than the United States, but they manage this debt differently. At the same time, developing countries often face debt crises because they lack the stability and trust that the U.S. has in global markets. The U.S. holds a unique position due to the dollar being the world's reserve currency, a privilege that allows it to borrow more easily compared to other countries. However, this privilege isn't unlimited. If trust in the U.S. economy falters, borrowing could become far more difficult and expensive. You may wonder, is having debt always a bad thing? Surprisingly, the answer is no. Borrowing can be a strategic tool if used wisely. For example, investing in infrastructure, education, or technological innovation can boost economic growth and productivity in the long term. The real issue is when borrowing becomes unsustainable, with debt growing faster than the country's ability to pay it back. That's when it can spiral into a crisis. A debt becomes dangerous once its costs, like interest payments, consume a significant chunk of the national budget. Imagine if most of your paycheck went toward paying just the interest on your credit card debt. That's essentially what happens when debt levels grow too high relative to revenue. Too much debt can also scare off investors and cause a financial crisis, making borrowing even more expensive and driving up costs for everyone. At a certain point, too much debt can lead to severe consequences. The government may struggle to pay creditors, leading to drastic measures like austerity policies or cuts to essential programs. Such crises often result in slowed economic growth, unemployment, and weakened global influence. So, what's being done about the U.S. debt? The government has taken some steps to address it, but progress is slow. Here are a few current strategies. Reducing discretionary spending, like cutting defense or certain non-essential programs. Reevaluating long-term obligations, such as entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare. Searching for ways to increase revenue, primarily through tax reforms or targeted tax increases. However, these solutions are highly debated, with disagreements between political parties slowing meaningful changes. One critical area of debate is taxation. Should taxes be raised to increase government revenues, or should spending be cut instead? Raising taxes on wealthy individuals and major corporations has been proposed, but it's met with resistance from those who argue it discourages investment and economic growth. On the other hand, drastic spending cuts could harm programs that millions of Americans rely on. Finding a balance between these two approaches remains one of the biggest challenges in managing debt. A balanced budget occurs when government revenues match or exceed expenditures. While it sounds straightforward, achieving it is extremely complex due to competing interests and priorities. Recent proposals for a balanced budget suggest a combination of reduced spending, tax reform, and economic growth policies. One of the most promising ways to reduce the debt burden is by growing the economy. If the U.S. GDP grows, the debt-to-GDP ratio improves, making the debt more manageable. However, economic growth isn't guaranteed, and it requires smart planning and investment to sustain it over time. History provides valuable lessons on dealing with debt. After World War II, the U.S. faced high national debt, but managed it through sustained economic growth and higher taxes. Similarly, other nations have navigated out of debt crises by implementing a mix of austerity, measures, and growth strategies. The big question is, can the U.S. resolve its debt crisis? While the road ahead is challenging, it's not impossible. Solutions will require difficult decisions, including policy reforms, smarter spending, and a renewed focus on innovation to drive economic growth. Ultimately, overcoming the debt crisis will depend on collaboration across political parties and a commitment to putting long-term stability above short-term gains. Public pressure and awareness play a critical role in shaping fiscal policies. The more informed Americans are about the debt issue, the more likely they can hold leaders accountable to make sound financial decisions. Because the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, its debt has global implications. Other countries hold U.S. Treasury bonds as a safe investment. But if the U.S. struggles to manage its debt, it could lead to financial instability on a global scale. Understanding the U.S. debt requires staying informed. Take the time to explore reliable sources, follow policy debates, and engage in discussions about the country's financial direction. Educating yourself empowers you to make informed decisions as both a voter and a consumer. National debt might sound like a complicated topic, but at its core, it's about balancing the government's spending and revenue to ensure long-term stability. We explored several key areas today: the massive size of U.S. debt and its per-citizen impact, how debt affects daily life through inflation, higher taxes, and potential budget cuts, current efforts and challenges in reducing this financial burden, the hope of future economic growth to ease the debt crisis. By understanding this issue, we're all better equipped to advocate for responsible solutions. If you found this video helpful, please share it with others to spread awareness about this critical issue. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think the U.S. should handle its growing debt? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. Check out the links in the description for related topics, and let's keep the conversation